You said your grandfather moved around a lot. Why was that?
Well, he wasn't a landowner. He rented land. Now, he had a brother. My grandfather had a brother that was also a Confederate veteran. And he was a much better manager than my grandfather because he was older. See, my grandfather came through the period of, in the history books, they called it the lost generation. They didn't get to go to school because they were children during the Civil War. So my grandfather Fuller didn't get any education. He learned to read and write. I think my grandmother probably taught him what he knew about reading and writing. So he just never managed to own any land. He just moved from place to place. Now, he did own his mules and wagons and plow tools and things like that, but he never did own any land. So that's why he moved around so much.
Well, could you describe how it worked when he would go to a new place, how he would rent land, how maybe that process would work?
Well, the process was that if he was living, say, with, we called them landlords, the people who owned the land, maybe he didn't particularly like that landlord, or maybe he wasn't too happy with the land. The land wasn't as rich as he thought it should be, so he would go and contact another landlord, say in another community. Maybe he found out that that fellow was going to have a farm to rent out, and he would go over and talk to him about it, and they would come to an agreement, and they would move. And that meant now moving in a 2-horse wagon, moving the cows, moving the corn, moving their hay and all that stuff, you know, along with the household goods. So it was a pretty big job. But they were accustomed to it, and it didn't seem to bother them much.
Do you know any specifics about the arrangement as far as what kind of payment they had to make?
Okay, now what you did, if you were renting like my grandfather did, they called it third and fourth. He gave the landlord every 4th bale of cotton, that was rent, and every 3rd load of corn. And that was the deal. Now, if a fella didn't own his own stock, that it means his mules, he had to pay the landlord half of it. He paid him half of the cotton and half of the corn and half of the cotton seed and all that stuff. That was the agreement, and they call that sharecropping. You've heard a lot about the sharecropping, and that's what they meant by that. See, a lot of folks couldn't even afford to own a mule or a pair of mules, so they had to use a landlord, and they had to pay him pretty high rent for that opportunity. Now, what he did, he paid for half of the fertilizer and half of the seed, and then that landlord would furnish him, they called it. The landlord would go to the country store and say, all right, now you let this man have enough groceries to make the crop on, and then I'll be responsible for that. If he can't pay you, then I'll be responsible for paying you. So usually the man running the store would have an agreement to let them buy groceries until the crop would come in. Say the cotton came in the fall, and then he'd pay him off. So that's usually how it worked.